Good morning and welcome to another episode of Focused on Fins. I am glad you're here with us, and we're going to talk a bunch of things Miami Dolphins here. I am Eric Smith. Joining me today, as always, is Anthony Testino, and together we're going to break down the most recent and the upcoming games, player performances, coaching notes, and whatever else comes up as we're talking about the team. We will also be taking your questions throughout the show, so drop them in the chat, be part of the conversation, and let's get started. Anthony, how you doing today?
Good, buddy. How about you?
Not too bad. Kind of a nicer day here in Pennsylvania. Probably similar, for you in New Jersey. Team is kind of, I guess, essentially traveling west, right? Coming from where you are, passing through me, going to Pittsburgh. Yesterday was pretty cold. Today's a little more mild, and weather is not looking great for the game Sunday. But that's kind of a good thing in a sense because I'm not sure that the game against the Jets really did much to dispel the narrative the Dolphins can't play in the cold. But I think this upcoming game I think is a good opportunity for that.
Yeah, agreed.
So,
Yeah, no,
no.
I was just gonna agree. It's
Yeah.
cold. It's cold, and I'm not a winter guy, so yeah, I hate this time of the year.
Yeah. So, before we get into the topics we want to discuss today, some of the things I really enjoy doing about this show with you, Anthony, is that, I know how much work I put into the film that I do, the videos that I do, and that leads me to have, the conviction to my opinions when we're talking about offensive line stuff. I know that you are one of those guys that matches that as well. And we both do weekly film breakdowns on my YouTube channel. Mine are offensive line focused. Anthony's is defensive focused. And I don't want to say that, just doing those film reviews, I don't know that it adds credibility because viewers are free to go and watch any of them. They can decide for themselves if they agree or they disagree with what they're saying. And I encourage the disagreements, right? I want to hear other people's thoughts. It gives us something else to consider, especially if you can, add a little bit of context behind that. And I think that, one of the best things about doing those videos is that it does open up, the enlightening conversations. And of course, you're going to have the other side of it too, but that's, just part of sharing any opinion on social media. But I think that more than credibility, doing those videos gives you and I, Anthony, gives us accountability. Like we can't sit here and flip flop our opinions every week on a player as to who we like, who we don't like. Like what we've said in the past, what we've put out there on video is out there for everybody to see. And that doesn't mean that we can't change our opinions, but I do think it forces us, when we see good or bad individual game performances, we really kind of got to double check our work and see whether that was, that success or that failure, is it sustainable or is it a situation where we need to eat our words? And that does happen. So we don't sit here and look to argue the national or social media trends, but I think it ends up feeling like that sometimes, like when we're talking about certain things and it feels like we're going against what a lot of other people out there are saying. And I'll give an example of that from my end, and that's Jonas Avayanaya. He's been getting a lot of praise this week, and I don't want to take anything away from the rookie. He's, people have been piled on him quite a lot, but I had this as his second lowest grade over the last 6 weeks for him, right? But you get a couple of highlight plays this week, and suddenly, the narrative is how much he's improved. When the reality is this upward trend for him, that it's been happening the entire season, and it still continues. So, Anthony, I know you had some back and forth on X about Tua yesterday. And I think you can see why now that I really try to avoid that topic because it's very polarizing. No matter which side you're on, or even when you're in the middle, somebody's going to hate your opinion. But since we started doing this, have you noticed, similar type of stuff with that?
With Tua, or are you just talking about?
No, just in general, that like that us doing the film work that we do in addition to doing these live shows now, that the film work kind of gives you a little more conviction in the
Okay.
opinions that you have about certain players.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that I understood. Yeah, absolutely. And I actually kind of touched a little bit on that in the last defensive breakdown that I did. Where I mentioned like I was excited because Chop had gotten home, caused a sack fumble, right? And 2 weeks before that, I had mentioned like he was starting to heat up. And then, the week after that, I was kind of driving that point home even further, like they're coming, and sacks usually come in bunches. So, when you kind of finally like, you know, throw your hat in the ring, right? And, really again, drive a point home, and it comes to fruition. Like it feels good because it means that, when you're watching the tape, like, what you're getting into. Like, um, sorry, I actually lost my train of thought there. Sorry, bud. Um, yeah, go ahead. Give me 1 second. I hear my dog. Give me 1 second, bud.
Of course, we're gonna get our weekly visitation from Griffey. So, see, we got quite a few people starting to join. As always, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and we will answer those live for the most part. You know, and we're going to talk about several things in today's video. From the Jets game, we're going to talk about some individual players. We're going to talk about the Steelers game, talk about some of the coaching staff. And we're not going to get too deep into roster moves and stuff like that for the future. That's something that we have kind of teed up for later in terms of possible roster cuts and what the salary cap situation could look like. I know that everybody's going to be talking about that, but that's one of those things that we do have coming up, but not necessarily here today. Everybody that's watching probably knows already, like the Dolphins had a great game against the Jets this past weekend. I was in attendance for that one. Going into it, it was kind of I don't know, identified as a cold weather type game for the Dolphins and Tua.
Sorry, bud.
I argued going into it. No, you're good. Just starting to talk about the Jets game a little bit here, and how the weather wasn't that bad there, right? It was a little chilly, but I was still there. I was in a couple of layers of long sleeve shirts and jeans. If I was coaching in that, I'd probably still been in shorts. So not definitely not a cold weather game. The Dolphins came out and they scored 21 points in the first quarter, right? They ran the ball like crazy. 3 consecutive touchdowns to start the game. That was the first time that Miami scored 21 points in the first quarter since 2015. After those first three touchdown drives, they were followed by punt, 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 field goal, and another punt. So it definitely changed there, and I kind of felt like for me, it was more of Mike McDaniel kind of, I guess, playing with his food in a sense. Like you ran the ball so well, you had no traditional pass sets, and you scored 3 straight times. And then after that, kind of started to stray away from that, and not a bad thing. You want to be able to see what else you can do. You don't gain anything. Once you're up 21 nothing, you don't gain anything more by going up 35 nothing, 49 nothing, and just doing the same thing over and over again. Like at some point, you got to see what else you can do and try to expand your menu a little bit. Devon Achane exited midway through the second quarter, was having a great game. They did say that he was available to come back, and doesn't sound like there's any risk of him missing the Steelers game. He finished with 7 carries, 92 yards, and a touchdown, and a catch for 13 yards. Jalen Wright was kind of the big story of the offense this week, coming in. As he had a couple carries before Achane went out, but he was really the workhorse after Achane left the game. Finished 24 carries, 107 yards, and a touchdown. So overall, I thought the offense did a really good job. When the game kind of, I don't want to say got close, right? But when it got to the point that was almost interesting again, right? They went back and ran the ball and closed it out. I'm going to talk about that one a little more when we get to the special team side of it. But do you have any thoughts on the Dolphins offense from the Jets game?
To be honest with you, it seemed like it was more of the same, right? That same recipe. Run the ball to a less than 200 yards, passing again. No explosives really. Waddle kind of quiet. Early on when we lost Tyreek, it was deep ball Waddle every week, right? Touchdown, 60 yards, week in, week out. Sorry, bud. Give me 1 second. Sorry, buddy.
No, I got you. So, I mean, that, I think what Anthony's saying there is just that, it's been kind of the same recipe that it's been for a while now of just being able to run the ball successfully and not asking the passing game to do a whole lot. I do have concerns, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the Steelers game, about how sustainable that is, as we move into, further into the season against some of the better teams that will play. And, at some point the passing game is going to have to step up and either, come back and win a game or, deliver that dagger that ends the game against a good, or at least a better team. As we get into the defensive side of it, I feel like the defense played an excellent game in this one. There have been times in the past where, Miami would get out to that early lead and the offense would kind of go into cruise control, and the defense would go a little too far into cruise control and let a bad team get back into it, whether it was the Panthers or the Saints, stuff like that. But, this time the defense was just excellent the whole way through. I essentially consider this a shutout for the defense. I know that the ending score said 10 points, but 7 of those points were off of a punt return touchdown, which obviously does not go against the defense. But even the other 3 points that they gave up in this game, it was after the Jets converted a fake punt, and that was an ugly fake punt. They, going to the right, they pitched it, the ball bounced, got a fortunate bounce up into the runner's hands, and he was able to convert the first down. That one finishes in a field goal, but those are tough situations for a defense to bounce back from. Like you go out, you get your stop, you get off the field, you get the punter out there, or you get your return team out there, and you think you're done, and then you turn around and you have to go back out there and get back up right away. So that can be really tough to do in the moment. So credit to the defense for keeping that one to a field goal. And I also felt like, some of the stuff, when you talk about, they were obviously playing against, I don't even remember the quarterback's name now. He was a quarterback at Missouri, undrafted rookie free agent. And usually I'm pretty good with names. I'm drawing a blank. But he didn't enter the game until it was 21-0. So it's not like they were playing against the third string quarterback the entire time. Tyrod Taylor is a player that has played well against the Dolphins before, and he was in the lineup until they were down 21-0. So when they had to go to Brady Cook is the quarterback the Jets had to put in there, that game was basically already out of hand. It would have been nicer, I guess, to see all 3 phases of the team play well together. Like we had the offense playing well, we had the defense playing well, the special teams. Like I said, those are two critical mistakes in terms of giving up the punt return touchdown and giving up a fake punt. You can't do that against good teams, but I do want to give credit to the offense as well in that sense, because after that fake punt, right, and after they converted that for a field goal, that made the score 24-10 at that point. I think there was about 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter, so that's still a game that's within reach, right? It shouldn't be, right? You have an undrafted free agent rookie quarterback, but you never know when, crazy stuff can happen. So 2-score game, the offense comes back out. And like I said at the beginning of, talking about the Jets game here, that it kind of felt like McDaniel was playing with this food after he got up 21-0. But then when it closed back down to that 14-point gap, he went back to what works. That next drive following the field goal that made it 24-10, they ran the ball 8 out of 9 times on that next drive and just, were dominant in that drive. Probably one of my favorite drives the entire season. So it was nice to see that even though they kind of strayed from what was working early in the game, that they were able to, recover. And when the game really kind of started to matter again, they went back to the stuff that really worked there. So you got Anthony coming back here. Anthony just, kind of talking about the defensive side of it and the special team side of it. So defensively, also had Chop Robinson coming in with a sack, had Rasul Douglas coming in with the interception. Like, those are guys that you have been talking about all season. So thoughts that you have on the defense or, special teams here in the Jets game.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All good.
Had that had almost had an emergency there without going too far into detail. Okay, so defensively, that's where we're at, right? Chop Robinson, Rasul Douglas.
Yep.
Okay, so yes, again, getting back to my Chop original Chop thoughts. Yes, been a guy that I've been telling people, relax, like it's coming, right? A lot of people give Jalen Phillips a hard time, right? Where the sack numbers, the pressures are there. He was easily the most disruptive guy that we had early on in the season. And again, I mean, not to sound like a broken record, but I've been saying the same thing for weeks, right? Chop needs snaps. And we're at a point now where he's going to get them. It's him, Judon, and Chubb, and they're not really rotating, anybody else in in the edge group. And he obviously came through with a sack fumble this week. So for as far as Chop goes, and the rest of the season, I'm really hoping he builds on that performance and starts to develop, because we need him to become a full-time player, not just a pass rush specialist. And Rasul, again, he's an older guy, he's a vet. You and I were talking off air before we got into this whole thing, and we were talking about what this team's going to look like maybe next year, cap situation, what they're going to be able to do, what they're not going to be able to do. And when it comes to Rasul, he signed for $3 million, which I mean is about as big a bargain as you can possibly get across the NFL when you look at his play this year versus the contract. So, Miami is in a little bit of a youth movement, and I don't know if they necessarily view themselves as trying to be super competitive next year. But again, the impact he's had has definitely been felt, and it's contagious. You can like the defense looks entirely different as a unit. I think it was Manti Te'o early in the year had called out, like, look at these guys. Somebody makes a play, they're not even, they're not excited, they're not dapping each other up, they're not doing this, and it's a complete 180 to what we see, now. So for me, yeah, again, Rasul, I hope is a guy that comes back. But it's all going to depend on the Dolphins situation, and considering that we don't have a GM, we really don't know what direction they're going to go. Right. So
yeah. So one of the things I had mentioned while you were gone was that about the Dolphins getting out to that 21-point lead before Brady Cook got into the game. So not going to listen to the narrative. I mean, the Jets are not a good team, but it wasn't that we beat a undrafted third string quarterback. The Dolphins were at 94% chance to win before we even got to that point. Another comment we have out here was from DJ Lloyd. Getting a second wide receiver to team with Waddle should be a priority now. And I agree with that. I think that we have seen enough, without Tyreek, to know that what we have behind Waddle is not enough. Malik Washington, nice player, but he's had a prime opportunity to step up and show that he could be that number 2 receiver, and he still has value. But I don't think that value is as a number 2 receiver. And same thing with Westbrook-Ikhine. He's been a pretty big disappointment. I think he still does, a lot of the dirty work type stuff, which is nice, right? But we could have got that, we got that out of Trent Sherfield. Like,
yeah,
you don't need to spend much money for that type of player. So I do think that getting a second or a number 2 wide receiver to pair with Waddle is a key thing. It kind of takes me to one of the next topics that I had on here that I want to talk about. And that was about whether or not Greg Dulcich has positioned himself as the future of the F tight end role in Miami, right? Like Darren Waller still probably a better playmaker than what Dulcich is right now. And Dulcich is not going to, make you, forget the George Kittles or anything like that, because he's not a wide tight end, right? He's not an inline blocker in that sense. But I feel like looking back over the history of this offense and the way that F position tight end has been used, I don't think it's going to be a big money player, not a primary part of the offense long term. I mean, you go back and look at all the guys that, going back to the Falcons, the 49ers, like they always had kind of that second tight end that could be a competent receiving option, but it was never really a playmaker, right? And even last year, like Jonnu was the closest thing that I feel like there's been to that into that F position. And the Dolphins said, it's not worth us paying. It's not an important enough part of the offense to pay. And we saw the Dolphins try to, do the pet project thing with Tanner Connor for years. Finally, gave that one up. But Darren Waller, maybe he returns next year, but we're talking about end of career type stuff for Darren Waller at this point. Has Dulcich, who had a great, probably his best play of the season, doesn't even count on the stat sheet because it got called back. But has he positioned himself to, in this also kind of leans into that point that you were talking about with the future of the Dolphins in terms of, not having a ton of cap flexibility, topic we'll get into, later in the season. But so is this the type of player that's kind of positioned himself to secure a spot for the next few years, at least, as the F tight end?
I definitely think he's earned a roster spot and the right to compete for the starting position next year. He's flashed a ton. It's I remember hearing about him when he was in Denver that there was just kind of like there was talk about, hey, keep an eye on this guy in the Sean Payton offense, like this guy's doing some things in camp, and then for whatever reason they went different directions, and then they end up spending the money on like Evan Ingram this year, right? So like it was, it's something that I guess Sean was looking for, but for whatever reason, it didn't work out with Dulcich. For Miami, again, they're in this mode of like, let's just keep kind of picking up the acorns as they fall and try to continue to acquire talent. And, I think they have a lot of, they have a couple guys that are top end talent. I think they have a big chunk of the middle part of their roster, and they need to continue to do what they did with Dulcich, with Juju Brents, and if these guys don't work out as starters or legitimate role players, at least like they end up as cheap quality young depth too, right? So they need to fill out all 53 spots. As well as anybody that tight end is a position that I am very adamant on that needs an upgrade. I'm really hoping that with kind of how things have changed this year, that the offense becomes something where, it can be Waddle as your wide receiver one. Give me a possession guy that you can count on, a safety blanket sort of deal, as your number two. And then I would really like to go out and get a high level tight end, and whether that's drafting somebody high in the draft or however it comes, that's been the style of offense that I've wanted to see for a long time now, and I feel like I'm getting teased a little bit here because the run game is kind of leaning in that direction. Where if they were to say, hey, this is going to be the new look Miami Dolphins, now how do we build off of that and expand on that? Well, it's kind of the way that I just described, and I'm hoping that they see it the same way.
Yeah, agree. And I think that is not, I don't want to say it, well, I don't know. Julian Hill has had a solid season, but he hasn't done enough to solidify himself as the future Y tight end in this offense. I think he is still better suited as a number 2 Y tight end, and maybe even number 3.
No, you're right about the two. I was going to say yes.
Yeah,
yes,
number 3
yeah.
tight end, right? But you got your 1Y, your 1F, and then Julian Hill. I think that Julian Hill can also do some other stuff that maybe could make somebody like Alec Ingold expendable in the future. Also, is a special teams guy and that type of thing. Also had this one in the chat here from DJ Lloyd. I'm nervous that if Weaver goes on to be a head coach somewhere, that we may lose Jack Jones, Rasul Douglas, and maybe Terrell Dodson. Paul Bellini mentions, oops, wrong one, that Dodson's under contract next year. And that was kind of a topic that I had for later in the show, but want to get to the stuff that's in the chat as it comes up. So we're going to jump to that one. Anthony Weaver, early in the season, it was like nobody's even going to talk to this guy about a head coaching position, the way that defense was playing, but it's still the same personnel on the defense, and he's got them playing at a very high level, right? And personality wise, like even if his defense was average, like Anthony Weaver has that personality that commands the room. He was going to get interview opportunities no matter what. But the way that he has this defense playing right now, it's going to be hard to see him not getting one of those head coaching jobs heading into 2026. And that's not I mean, it's not good, right? But with him being a minority candidate, the Dolphins would receive 2 third-round picks in return for him getting a head coaching position, which is it's important. But I think more important to that is what it means afterwards. Like, is there, and I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but do we have a coach on staff that would be ready to promote internally, like the way the Detroit Lions were able to do with Kelvin Shepard, where you can kind of keep doing the same thing? Because I mean, it's really going to suck to have gone through all this and then go to a completely new defensive coordinator that hasn't been here and have to need him to relearn the personnel and go through all the growing pains again. And would you have players like Rasul Douglas, Jack Jones, like, are those players that if Anthony Weaver went somewhere else, would he try to pull them with him as free agents? So just kind of your thoughts on Anthony Weaver and what the impact of that could be if he does go somewhere else.
So what's funny is I actually just brought this topic up on Twitter, I think either yesterday or the day before, but I had mentioned kind of like, listen, if Weave leaves, right, like, do we have an in-house candidate? And you have the Slowick there, right? I don't remember if is it Ryan or Bobby?
Ryan.
That's the Ryan's
Bobby
the defensive, Bobby's offense,
yep.
right? Okay. Yeah, I just didn't want to get that wrong. So you have that there, right, with the ties to McDaniel, obviously. So he may have the leg up being his, quote unquote buddy. But the whole reason I brought the topic up was because, dude, Austin Clark, I mean, is phenomenal. At what point does he get, consideration somewhere? Because people have to notice that, he continuously, it doesn't matter what he has to work with, even if it gets off to a slow start, right? We're giving Anthony Weaver credit, and rightfully so. Like, Austin Clark deserves all the credit in the world too. I mean, last year he had Deshaun Hand and some throw me away kind of guys, right? Like cheapo guys, and it was quality play from the D line. This year he gets thrown 3 rookies: Zach Sealer, Matt Dickerson, and Matthew Butler, right? And it's like, okay, well, watch him make it work. Like, that's what this guy does. So yeah, again, I can't say that I know enough of their history as far as where they've been, what they've coached, that kind of thing, off the top of my head. That would do. I think I would be doing a little bit of an injustice to say that I knew enough to say one or the other, or if they're either of them are qualified to do so. But it's possible. And then as far as Weaver, yeah, I think, like you said, man, he commands a room. There is something special about the guy. You can just tell, he's got this like bravado about him that he's had coach quality. There's no doubt. There was a couple times where during press conferences throughout the year, he had me ready to run through a brick wall, man. I mean, like it was eye opening, because you hear about it and you see the kind of maybe not happy go lucky, but the fun side of him, the friendly side of him. And then all of a sudden he flipped the switch and got serious, and it was like, oh shit. So that's why guys gravitate towards him, and I think as far as players following him, why wouldn't they, for one? And then also two, I think that just kind of comes with the territory. There's always a couple of those guys, like, right. Van Ginkel followed,
Yeah.
Despite everything that we think about Flores and that whole thing, Gink said he loved them, and
Yep.
he obviously went there to go be with him again. So, guys will go places where they think the coach will take care of them. And I don't mean just like let them get away with, stuff. I mean, allow them to shine, because if they play well, that means more money, right? And that's most of the time what is top of the priority list. So, yeah, I hope that satisfies the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to necessarily bounce around too much, but like I said, I do want to try to keep, get the viewers involved, right? When you guys ask questions, we're going to try to answer them. So we're going to go back to the tight end thing. Isaiah Likely, is he a target? For me, I would say no. I think that Likely is a good player. I think he'd be a good fit as an F tight end in the system, but I don't think he's going to come cheap at all. And if they weren't going to pay Jonnu a little more to be here, I don't think they're going to go out there, especially with Dulcich and Waller, right? If Waller returns next year as well, I don't think that there's enough of a hole in that specific role in this offense that they're going to go out there and pay big money for a player like Isaiah Likely. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one, Anthony.
Yeah, just real quick, Isaiah Likely is actually somebody that I've really, really liked for a few years now. A small, funny, stupid story, but I had traded somebody in like fantasy football after he had the big week 1 against Kansas City because I said, oh my God, it's finally happening. They're going to run this offense through Isaiah Likely and the tight ends, at least a passing game. And I was obviously wrong about them doing that, but I really do think he's that kind of talent. I mean, he's a mismatch nightmare, man, and I don't think he's a bad blocker either. I can't say that I've spent too much time studying it. But I would be willing to throw down a couple bucks and say he's adequate just right now. But I think, again, I'm hoping that they have a change of heart in how they treat this tight end position. But if it's McDaniel in place and, the past is any indication on how they're going to spend assets and, where the money goes and that kind of thing, then no, they're going to try to continue to make that a cheap position, and kind of an afterthought. So again, I agree with you. I don't think Likely comes cheap, but personally, if it was me, I think if I was comfortable with the blocking, I would be in on him. But again, that's just me.
What about Michael Mayer? That was a name that was kind of hot early in the offseason. Supposedly the Raiders were willing to part with him. For me, this is a player that I wouldn't hate the move, right? I think that he is better than Julian Hill, but how much better is the question. I think he's an upgrade, but at what price? Do you have any thoughts on Michael Mayer?
So I won't get too much into Michael Mayer, but I was all in when those rumors were circling about as well. Because, and again, maybe that's some of that is just because I really wanted the upgrade at tight end because I thought it would pay big dividends. But the other trend that I think we need to pay attention to when we're talking about all this is the fact that the league is starting to go towards a lot of 12, 22, 13 personnel. And, it's a little bit less spread like it was, a couple of years ago, 5-10 years ago, where that was the trend. A lot of these teams are trying to find these tight ends that can do both and, create mismatches and run play action, and I know, somebody on Twitter did a pretty good breakdown of it, like using Sean McVay and what the Rams are doing this year. And, I know also too, I think Dan Orlovsky put out something where like saying that this has been a trend, since like a couple of years ago, and it's increasing and it's been like a league high now for, I don't know how many years, but again, that's kind of the direction the league is going, right? It's something the league is it goes in cycles. It's cat and mouse, right? The defense adjusts, they start to do this. Well, the offense now starts to go this direction, and then it'll do that for a couple of years. You'll see wrinkles, right? All that kind of stuff. And then the defense will adjust again, and that's kind of how it goes. So, with the tight end, I do think it's important that it's not an afterthought as much as it's been lately. But yeah, I mean, realistically, if the money's right and the usage is going to be right and the blocking is adequate, I like both players.
All right. 35 minutes in, and we get our first Tua question. I'm going to let you take this one first. Do you think that Tua is being unfairly criticized from Justin Floyd? I thought the last game he played well outside of 4 off-target throws. His numbers are low because we are elite with the running the ball now. So thoughts on Tua?
Boy, oh boy, is this a complicated answer. I'll say this, right? I'm a Tua guy. I'm a Tua fan. I'm a Miami Dolphins fan first. So if Tua is not the guy that's going to lead us to the promised land, he can go. It's as simple as that. All right. I want to make that very, very clear for anybody that thinks, Tua stands and all that. No, it's a made up thing, whatever. Anyway, this has definitely been a down year for Tua. There's no hiding that. And the thing that bothers me the most is it's the routine stuff that, I mean, Tua could have, turned his back in play action, stuck his back foot in the ground, let it fly, blindfolded, and it was on the money. Like, he was operating at that level for a while. And that's why I was willing to go to war for him. Because yeah, fine, he has the deficiencies, and okay, he doesn't run and create outside structure very often. He's smaller. He, obviously the injury history, the arm is not, exactly ideal, but it's good enough, right? But again, I've always thought that if you built the offense the way I was talking about, and you let Tua kind of get up there and control things and read the defense and audible and adjust and get guys into the right position and in the right play, I really think you can win with a guy like him. In the same manner that I think Detroit does with Goff. But I just think it's maybe we're at the point where it's run its course in a way. I almost think that no matter what he does, there's always going to be very loud, a little section that is going to hate him and wants him to fail, that are Dolphins fans. And again, I think you can ask for change and want more and be critical, but also still be respectful and root for the quarterback of your favorite team. I just don't agree there. But yeah, I think Tua is capable of turning it around, but I think he might be at the point where he would benefit from new scenery. And I think for the Dolphins, fan base, and we've seen it through, and we can't keep doing this every year where it's there's always something, right? Like at some point, the Dolphins, they just have to figure it out, and they have to get it done, and they have to win. And prolonging, this kind of thing anymore. I just think, we're kind of just running on a treadmill at this point. Miami needs to, they need to definitely have a plan B, or their new plan A, however you want to look at it. This off season, whether it's a draft pick in the first round, in the third round, whatever. I do think it needs to be a quality asset spent on somebody. If they like somebody enough, or you bring in a veteran, you make a trade, whatever it is. But I do think you need somebody that is going to make Tua compete. Let's put it that way. Again, I love Tua, but I will say this year has been very hard to defend him because a lot of the stuff that he's done in the past, he's not doing consistently anymore. And there is a million other things I could say, but I'm going to try to keep it somewhat short.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think the biggest thing that I agree with is he's not the same player that he was, or at least not playing the same way that he was. It felt like in the past that you could build an offense around him, maybe not an offense that could go on the road and win the big games or beat the top teams in the league, but you could call a game plan where he was the focal point of that offense and he was able to be the conductor out there. I don't know what his time to throw this season versus previous seasons are, but it feels like, as you said, like in the past, he would have that play action where he was seeing it before the ball was snapped. And as he was turning around, he's letting that ball rip. And that feels like that is lacking this year, right? And it to me showed up again in the Jets game because during those first three drives, no traditional pass sets, 3 touchdowns, and then you get into some traditional pass sets, and the offense just gets stuck in the mud. And he's obviously, like we talked about earlier, going to have opportunities to, kind of knock off that narrative or whatever you want to call it with him. But this isn't a the fans that are out there saying I've been right the entire time about Tua. I completely disagree with that because, like I said, in the past you could do that. Like you could have him run the offense. Like the Tua that we're seeing now is not a player that I feel like you can run the offense through. I think that's why, like when you looked at McVay going from Jared Goff with the Rams and going to Matt Stafford, I think it was the same idea there. Like Goff was a quarterback you could win with, right? But you have to protect him, you have to guide him with the play calls versus somebody that can just get out there and make things happen, which I think is more Stafford. So I feel like, in the past, Tua was, maybe closer to what, and not athletically, right? Like you said, not able to escape, not doesn't have the big arm, but in terms of being able to be the focal point of the offense, I feel like, you know, 2-3 years ago, even last year, like that was where Tua was, and this year that's just not what we're getting from Tua. So want to, and like you said, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. I just wanted to let you know. I did want to say something before we move on. You're good.
Yeah, no, we are bigger fans of the Dolphins than any individual players. There are players that I love to watch. I love to break down. There are certain players on other teams that I still enjoy watching, right? But I want the best thing for the Dolphins, and I just don't see the path where, um, you know, as we get into next year, and we'll get into more of this later in the season. But I don't see right now where the path of having Tua as the quarterback the next 2 or 3 years is the best path for the team overall. So what would you want to add in?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I honestly think if we wanted to just go nuts, we could realistically fill an hour with just talking about Tua.
Hmm.
But I'm going to try to sum it up real quick with just the bullet points. I think where I'm at right now with him um, is I wonder about the ankles because he's mentioned the ankles, and I worry about the hip, right?
Yep.
So again, he's looked a little slower, a little more sluggish this year, right? Those kinds of things. So then you obviously have the concussion stuff, which I think he's done a good job of keeping himself out of harm's way,
Hmm.
but it can happen at any time. And I do think
Yep.
that there's a possibility that that's affecting how he plays. I think in the beginning of the year, he looked like maybe he was sped up a little bit. His feet, he had little happy feet, maybe trying to move and do things in the pocket that he didn't necessarily have to do, trying to get rid of the ball, almost like, hey, that's my first read. And I'll even double clutch it, but I'm going there because I want to get this ball out so badly. I think there's part of that. I think there's also we're from up north, right? So I have friends that are Giants fans, and it's happened twice now where at the end of their career, at the end of Eli's career, the Giants offensive line was so bad that it was just like, dude, he always like doesn't even look like he wants to throw the ball. Like he looks like he doesn't want to stand in the pocket. Like he's
Right.
again happy feet. He's tired of taking a beating. And then you got to see it with Daniel Jones. I mean, they had the 1 year where I thought the O line play was, quality, and they, and they won. And then the next year, it was right back to kind of being what the other years looked like, where it was a complete mess. So I think there's part of that. I think when you just and we even saw it, I think, with Tannehill too, in my opinion.
Hmm.
That I think he was, I believe, at one point he was the highest, broke the record for the most time sacked in a season or a 4-season stretch or whatever it was, but it was
Yep.
a lot. That affects quarterbacks. If they don't have the utmost confidence, in the guys up front, then no, they're not gonna hit their back foot, step up and drive the ball. They're not gonna totally keep their focus and their eyes downfield. Your eyes tend to drift a little bit and be like, is Jonah holding up or is this dude gonna wallop me? Because
Yep.
hey, that's Chris Jones over there, and that's gonna hurt. Um, Again, he's human, so uh, again, I think we could really spend like an hour because talking about this, and I would love to one day because I really do think if I could put it in the words, take my time and lay it out, I do think I could build a pretty damn good case that I think the Dolphins have honestly let Tua down more than Tua has let the Dolphins down. But again, I'm with you that I just think, listen, it's time. We tried. It didn't work out. You only get so long at this thing. You can't like run it back because father time and injuries and those kinds of things and the salary cap, they all play a part, right? And things only last for so long. I kind of think we've hit that threshold that Miami does need to start moving towards the future. If they decide to run it back one more year with the possibility of, hey, Tua's on a short leash, and if we feel the kid behind him is ready or whatever the case may be, then we can pull the cord on that and we'll move on right then and there. But I think that also comes with Mike McDaniel coming back too again. So just a lot of things are up in the air. I don't necessarily know how all that's going to go. Right. Again, we still don't have a GM in place.
Yep. So we are into 10 minutes of Tua talk out of our hour show, and that's going to be the end of that. I do not have the willpower to go an hour talking about Tua, so you're going to have to find somebody else to do that one if you want to do it, Anthony.
I'll do that one alone.
So another question we had in here, bouncing back to the tight end conversation, Kenyon Sadiq out of Oregon. DJ Lloyd says round one, maybe. Not a player that I've watched extensively, but I know that a lot of people that I trust seem to be very high on him. In the little bit that I've seen of him, I do still have questions with his ability to win consistently in line. So I wonder, is he more of an F tight end? And as I talked about earlier, like this is the F tight end is an important part of the offense, but is it a round one type thing? And I don't know about that. Like I would say that the Y tight end, I would certainly consider that. We've talked about Tyler Warren. That's the type of player that I would see as a round one option. I'm not sure if Kenyon Sadiq falls in there, but again, I haven't watched him a lot. Have you done any work on Sadiq yet?
So I've watched like the highlights, right, that kind of thing, just to see, because he's right now he's a very hot name. Yeah, he's an exciting prospect. I would be very interested in going that route. My only question is the same question that you have, because he's 6'3", 245, which for me, I kind of want the 6'6" guy that's 255, right? And even if he sacrifices a little bit of athletic ability, right? And maybe Sadiq runs like a 4.5 flat or 4.4. I mean, who knows? He to me, he looks like an athletic freak. So I don't know where he'll be, but like maybe he's in that area where if you're going to add, 3 more inches and 10 pounds and tell me that the guy's going to run a 4.62, I'll gladly still take the bigger guy, man. I think seeing what Waller did, in the end zone and being able to high point and go up and get that crossbar ball, right, that you can just kind of throw up as like hey, my guy's going to get it or nobody's going to get it. I think that's very, very important, and it's nice to have. Where with Jonnu, yes, it was great, but it still feels like it's a little bit more of the same. Like he's another 6'3", 6'4" guy, right, where it's like much bigger catch radius than what you have in your wide, Tyreek and Waddle being 5'10", 5'11".
Yeah.
But it's still not like, it's not that basketball player thing, and that's what I want. Some of the best ones that we've had, Tony Gonzalez, Antonio Gates, Jimmy Graham, those guys, like, give me that. That's what I'm looking for. And if they can block or at least are adequate, I'll live with it.
Absolutely. So closing in on an hour, we're at 48 minutes now. If we keep having questions come in and Anthony has some time, then maybe we can extend it a little bit today.
I'm all good now. I'm all good now.
All right. Let's keep going through some of the topics we need to get through. And if some more questions pop in, then we will spend a little extra time today than we have in the past. So the one roster move this week, I think, was and I don't know if this happened yet, is that Mike McDaniel said that Andrew Meyer is going to be designated to return from IR this week. So he's going to go on the 53-man roster. We saw last week that Keon Smith was promoted from the practice squad. And, a team is only going to carry 3 reserves active on game day. So that would have been Larry Borum, Keon Smith, and Dan Brunskill against the Jets. With Andrew Meyer, I don't think we're going to see Keon Smith getting promoted to the active roster again. I don't know what they're going to do as far as the 53-man roster, because we kind of had this conversation last week when we talked about Hayden Rucci and who you would let go. I don't think the team necessarily wants to release Kendall Lamb. I think that's the one that makes the most sense, right? You still have Larry Borum, Andrew Meyer, Dan Brunskill as your 3 reserve linemen. You probably bring Kendall Lamb back on the practice squad. Not sure that we see Andrew Meyer do anything this year, but just quickly, do you have any thoughts as far as how that impacts the roster with Meyer returning when he hopefully does this week?
Not particularly. I think it's the same two guys. Like you said, we kind of, beat that dead horse already a little bit. To me, yeah, it's who did you mention? I'm sorry. What was being possibly cut, or who? Oh, Kendall Lamb.
Kendall
That's
Lamb.
that's where I was
Yep,
trying to
with
go.
Larry
Kendall Lamb
Borom, Brunskill, and Meyer.
or Eskridge would end up being the other guy that, for me at least, just because again, I hasn't really done anything as far as the offense goes, and I personally think that you could either kick return with Malik, Ollie, Jalen Wright, as a way of getting him a touch when, as a couple extra touches when Achan's in there, because, we'll see how that dynamic kind of works, right? If Achan's good to go. But I find it hard to believe that he would take too much off of Achan's plate, just because I know Mike McDaniel loves him, and rightfully so. I get it. But yeah, we'll see. Again, we haven't seen the guy play yet. I'm not going to overthink it or jump for joy yet on something that we have no idea what it even is yet.
Yeah. And on the topic of D. Eskridge, I know that was one that you had mentioned last week. One thing I did notice with Eskridge was that with Elijah Campbell out of the lineup, Eskridge was used as a gunner on punt teams, right? So that, when we talk about those bottom of the roster guys and how you fill those positions in, right? I think that you could, whatever Kendall Lamb is doing on special teams right now, if he is doing anything, is probably just going to be your extra point field goal block teams, where I feel like Meyer would slide into those and replace that easily. If you kept Kendall Lamb on the 53 and released D. Eskridge in favor of Meyer, right, then you have to sort that puzzle out then next, right? If Ethan Bonner or Elijah Campbell are unavailable, who's your next gunner at that point? So that's just one of those things to keep in mind when we see whatever that roster move ends up being, just the kind of conversations that have to happen there. So before we get to the hour mark, I want to get to the Steelers game, so that if people don't want to stick around for any extra questions we have, we've kind of hit on that. So Steelers game this week. Sunday, 1:00, and this is going to be a true cold weather game. I don't know what I'm up to. It's over. It's probably between 40 and 50 games did in person. And a lot of those have been in November and December. It's been up in Buffalo. It's been in New York. It's been in Pittsburgh. And I can tell you that of all of those games that I've attended, and I've been to snow games, I've been to night games, probably the coldest game that I've been to was the wild card game that the Dolphins played at Pittsburgh. And if I remember correctly, it was a 1:00 game. It was definitely a daytime game, but it was cold. It was
Yep.
windy. It was wet. The most miserable game that we have been to. I think it's going to be kind of the same weather conditions this Sunday in Pittsburgh, and that stadium is more open. Like when you look at even a 20-degree day in Buffalo, when you walk into that stadium, you walk in the second level and then you walk down. Like the field is lower, so I don't feel like the wind is much of a factor there. Whereas Pittsburgh is more of an open stadium that wind can really get going. So I'm looking forward to this game, in the sense that, like, there are so many of those narratives that can be not eliminated, right? But you can go a long way towards answering them, right? Can't beat winning teams, right? Mike Tomlin's teams are notorious for being, having winning records. Can't win night games, right? This is going to be a Monday night game. Can't win on the road, obviously going to be in Pittsburgh. And then the weather part of it. Like, I feel like you answer a lot of questions if you're able to come out here and win the game. I think the running game is still going to travel well. I think the defense is still going to travel well. I think at some point Tua is going to have to do more than he has these past few weeks. And it could come down to whether, Tua and the passing game in general are ready to step up. But just thoughts that you have on this game coming up.
Yeah, so I just pulled up the weather just to take a look at it, and Monday is showing 21 degrees with a low of 16. Morning rain followed by a mix of rain and snow in the afternoon. High of 43 during the day. 10 to 20 miles an hour wind gusts. Right, so yeah, not ideal for the guys that are coming down from Florida, or going up from Florida. But like you said, it's an opportunity, and if they can figure out a way to get it done, It's a big confidence booster, right? Not even just to shut people up, but for themselves inside the locker room. I think they can look at themselves a little differently, with a little more pep in their step, a little more confidence, a little more belief that, yeah, things are changing. They're headed in the right direction. And just from a history perspective, yeah, yeah, that playoff game was pretty brutal. But they do have like a little bit of like a good history of recent like, years in Pittsburgh with the Charles Clay fighting off two guys, scores touchdown, Antonio Brown stepping out of bounds, right? That game was in the snow, and Miami ended up winning. So I'm not I'm not ready, just to say snow. It's an L, basically. So
Right.
I like having something in the past that I can refer to and say like they've done it, I've seen it. Hopefully they can do it again.
Yeah, I agree to an extent, but at the same time, like some of those players are not even in the NFL anymore from some of those games that we're talking about. So in a sense, the new players, new opportunity to prove it. But one of the things that kind of makes me optimistic about it, one of the quotes that I saw this week, uh, Patrick Paul was asked about, what's clicked in the run game, and his answer was us just wanting to get out there and dominate people, not just block them and fit them up, but to really dominate folks. And, you and I, we've played up here in the North, we've played in these weather conditions, and we both know that it hurts a lot less when you're out there hitting somebody versus being the one getting hit in that type of weather. So I think that just hearing him express that mentality, right? And we see it with guys like Aaron Brewer, Austin Jackson, right? They're looking to get after guys. So I think that could be kind of a big factor, right? They're not just looking to go up there and play football and run the ball. They're looking to get up there and dominate. I think that defensively, like we've kind of seen that as well. Like we got some dogs on the defense. It's not the defense from last year that was we'll see how they react in the cold, but like last year against the Packers, it was really disappointing to see a defense that was like avoiding avoiding hitting. So I'm looking forward to how that mentality has changed for this group.
Yeah, and just to take that a step further, I don't care about the yards. The offensive line did a pretty damn good job opening up holes. Jalen Wright is running hard, like
Yes.
hard. And again, when you do that in the cold, guys tend to not want to hit, not want to tackle. It, like you said, it hurts, it sucks. They don't want to do it. Um, guys, if they don't have to move and they can spend time kind of standing still with their hands inside their warmers, like they'd rather do that for a play, than go chase an outside zone run on the opposite side of the field. It's probably going to get pushed out of bounds for 6 yards, right? But if Jalen Wright is going to run with that kind of nastiness to his game, and kind of feed off of what you're talking about, the O line wants to do and the way they've been doing it, yeah, that can travel, and I think in a game that's so cold, maybe we do see a little bit more Jalen Wright and Ollie Gordon, because of the weather factor. Not that you want to take the ball out of Achan's hands, but I don't know. I just think that you might be able to find an advantage, somewhere, one way or another.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Like in that, do you kind of come in with the hammer, right? Do you come in with Jalen Wright and kind of soften up the defense before you let Devon Achan, right? Like if Wright's gotten out there and he has run over the safety a few times, right? Achan is not going to run over the safety the same way, but if the safety's been put on his butt 2-3 times in the first quarter, and then Achan gets out there in the open field in the second quarter, right? Then maybe that safety or the cornerback, right? Maybe he's like, yeah, I'm done with this shit. Like
You
you,
talking about
you
that number 5 guy?
you can pick any cornerback that you want on that roster, but he is one of them. So before we're going to finish up with a couple of the questions that we have in the chat. Do you have anything for the viewers that are tapping out here in an hour, Anthony? Do you have anything you want to add before we get into the questions?
No, I don't think so. The last thing, and yeah, I'll do this then. You know what? this last month of the year is going to get interesting just because we started off a certain way. We've flipped the script. We look a hell of a lot better. There's plenty of things to improve. We're kind of, wondering what's going on with Tua. All it's kind of out the window. I don't know if we're going to get in. They obviously need help, but to get an opportunity here now, to really get back, in the mix of things, and you have to go through Burrow, you have to go through Drake May, you have to go through who else am I missing? What do we got? Aaron Rodgers and why am I? Oh, and Baker Mayfield.
Mayfield. Yep.
That's a pretty respectable group there. So listen, if you really want to go into the off season and give the fans something to be excited about and leave a good taste in everybody's mouths, pause. There's an opportunity to do so, because it's not just beating up on the lowly Jets. It's not just beating up on Tyler Shuck and the Saints. It's, a Marcus Mariota led Washington team that's got 3 wins. This is a real opportunity that, hey, look yourselves in the mirror and say, is this more of the same, or can we go out and, really do this thing? I'm not saying you got to go 4-0, not even saying you got to go 3-1, but if they can go out and be competitive in all 4 of those games and maybe win two of them, and especially maybe a one on the road where everybody's kind of saying they got no chance, or the old Dolphins, right, wouldn't win that game. Like, go get it done, man. Go get it done. Quit messing around and find a way.
Absolutely. All right. So got a few questions left in the chat here. We'll hit them up here before we, close out the show for today. So this one, I'm going to let you answer this first, right? Kurt Warner, questions from Corey Gammon saying Kurt Warner has talked in the past about how this scheme does a really good job of opening option 1, but not a great job with the what if option 1 isn't open. Thoughts, and I'm going to let you answer this, Anthony, but I want to keep this away from.
I'll keep it
more
quick.
and more towards the scheme than the personnel, I guess.
So yeah, I actually think about this often because, again, I always go back and wonder what it would look like if they ran the style of offense that I want to see them run, where it's not so based upon, anticipation. It's would be more of a progression thing, and it would be more of a let's get to the line you have access to the entire playbook. You are the coach on the field. You are borderline the offensive coordinator at that point. Just it's your show. Run it and do what we heard, you did at Alabama, which was, hey, Tua's doing things at practice that we haven't even gotten into or gone over yet, and he shouldn't even know or be able to do. And he's doing them, making checks and doing this and doing that. Like, where is that? Again, I find this mind-boggling that I still don't have a definitive answer on how much control he really has in the offense and at the line. And I know also the motion is part of that as well, right? Where if you get up to the line and there's motion involved, you can't really make changes. But again, I want to see an offense that I think Tua has more control. I would like to, but again, we discussed earlier why that may not happen.
Yeah. All right. So next question we have, and the last one kind of that's in the queue here. So if you got any more, then get them in there before we shut it down today. So Paul Bellini, question for Eric. Are you running it back with the offensive line, or are you investing in the offensive line with a day 1 or 2 pick in 2026? And then that's followed up by John Blue saying if it was up to him, he would take Francis Mauigoa from the University of Miami in the first round, continue building the offensive line. So my thoughts on this, I think it's a complicated discussion because I think that what we're seeing, I know that Chris Grier is a taboo topic, right? But I feel like we're seeing that, I think Chris Grier did an okay job identifying talent for the system, did a crap job of identifying talent that could stay in the lineup for this system. Because when I look at, the players they've had in the past and the players that they have now on the offensive line, it's a good group. Like, it's a good group without James Daniels right now, right? You've got one reserve in Cole Strange in there, and Strange has not been playing great, but when you only have one backup in there, you can work around that. But as we move into next year, right, I think that you are 100% locked in with three of them, right? Patrick Paul, Jonas Vaina, Aaron Brewer. But then you get to the other side, and it's like you can't run it back with both of them, right? They're both kind of injury risk. How do you run it back and then have the same thing happen early in the season? So I think you have to make a decision there for one or the other. I know we've talked about this a little bit in the past, and right, it's a topic that I think about probably more often than I should. But like tackle is the more important position in this offense for me. And when Austin Jackson's on the field, very good in this system, and we're seeing that. But you can't run it back next year with Austin Jackson and Larry Borom, right? If you're going to say that you're going to play next year with Austin Jackson, then I do think that you need to have somebody who's really ready to step in and be the future right tackle, right? Because if we come out next year and Austin Jackson gets injured again, then we're kind of in the same position. But at the same time, like you can't, those guys don't just fall off of trees either, right? The guy that can be a backup right tackle that is capable of taking over for Austin Jackson. So I think that really ends up, being a guy that if you're going to do that, then it's got to be a guy that can play guard as a rookie and could bump out the tackle, right? And that's, I look at Patrick Paul, for example, where when he was drafted, he was not a guard prospect at all. That was not a player that I felt like you could put in at guard and bump out to tackle. Francis Maligoa would be a player that I do feel could step in, be your right guard right away, and be an option at right tackle. I do still have some concerns with his ability to play on the edge in the NFL, but I think that probably my more, and I mean, James Daniels, again, good fit in the system, but we've seen him for 3 plays in the regular season. I know that me and you both want to bring him back, but I think that it's easier to replace a right guard than it is to replace a right tackle, right? So do you replace James Daniels with somebody who you're more confident is going to be in the lineup for the entire game or the entire season? So I do think it's a very complicated discussion. Would I spend a round 1 or 2 pick on it? And that was the question from the beginning. Probably not. Like I would probably more lean towards, your early day 3 or, late day 2 type selection that you draft a guy to be your swing tackle, right? You either convert Larry Borom to a guard that has swing tackle possibility, right? But I think that you need to get a young player in there that you're not spending the prime capital for it, right? I feel like that's probably got to be more of your skill position players. But I think that you probably run it. Geez, I I hate this answer, especially going through and looking at the free agent and the rookie options. Like, I probably bring both of those guys back, but at the same time, I probably draft a 3rd or a 4th round tackle so that when something does happen, because I think that something will. I'm not confident that James Daniels and Austin Jackson are going to make it through the entire season. We've got to have a better plan in place that when one of those guys go down, that we are ready to, promote from within. We're not going out and grabbing Cole Strange off the Cleveland Browns practice squad or anything like that. That, we find a way that is a more seamless transition to whoever that 6th offensive line ends up being. I know I talked a lot and didn't answer anything at all, but before we close it out here, I want to give you a chance to respond to that one as well, Anthony.
No, you were good. I mean, I was doing the same thing in my head where I'm like, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? You look at other positions on the team, right? And offensive line and defensive line are different, right? Because they're a bigger group that all works together. It's not just we need a receiver. We go get one receiver, right? Like when you talk an offensive line, it's a domino effect. So when you make a decision on one guy, you kind of are making a decision on, maybe 2 or 3 other guys, right? They all affect each other. So it's complicated. I would say this, that I'm a little more open to, continuing to draft, using high picks on offensive linemen only because I don't want to see it be an issue anymore. So I will probably forever be open to using a first round pick on an offensive lineman, because if I don't have to think about it and it's not hurting the team, then I'm happy, and I don't care how you got there, right? It's kind of one of those, at least, situations for myself anymore. I'm so tired of it that just please fix it, and I don't care what you do. Um, and then, we talked about James Daniels and Austin Jackson, and I kind of have at this point, some Austin Jackson fatigue, and it's kind of like, if you can go for it. I don't think you can cut him until after, like, post June 1st, and have it make sense. So maybe you can find a trade partner, or maybe you can slide him in the guard where it's not, if he gets hurt, it's a little bit easier to, to replace. Or if your starting right tackle at that point gets hurt, then you have him to kick back outside. I don't know. Again, I'm with you. It's complicated. I know this. I'm okay with drafting one high. I don't necessarily want to give up on James Daniels, because I like the thought of James Daniels a lot. And he has three position flexibility on the inside. And I think he's above average and solid at all three. And, also too, I'll use this a little bit as an excuse, is we don't know who the head coach is going to be. So are we even running outside zone, or are we going to be running something else? So that to go gun to head and say, you got to choose, I can't, man.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so that wraps up the questions we have in the chat. So want to, thank you for hanging out here with us on Focused on Fins Live. Big thanks to Anthony for the insight, and for, all the viewers, all your questions and comments. We appreciate these interactions. Had a lot of fun with this one today. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you like, subscribe, and share, so we can get more Dolphins fans in here, get, more people joining the conversation. We will be back with more breakdowns and updates soon. Until then, stay focused on Fins.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.